Ambassador Talker Zell, known simply as Talker, stood rigidly in the command center of the Zalari diplomatic vessel, staring through the viewport as Earth grew larger in the distance. His elongated blue fingers, adorned with bioluminescent patterns unique to his species, tightened around the padded armrest of his command chair. He fought to suppress his anxiety. Unwilling to let his subordinates see any sign of weakness despite all the extensive training, simulations, and historical research, the reality of what he was about to undertake settled like a lead weight in his chest. Final approach to Earth orbit, the pilot announced, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Atmospheric conditions are significantly more volatile than our projections indicated. Talker swallowed hard and nodded, his large, multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly. The Zalari diplomatic vessel was one of the most advanced in their fleet, equipped with shielding, sophisticated inertial dampeners, and an advanced stabilization system. Yet, even with all that technology, Earth's environment was proving to be an unpredictable challenge below. Thick storm clouds churned across the planet's surface. Great swaths of dark gray and electric blue stretching for miles. Flashes of lightning illuminated the turbulent skies in sudden bursts of raw energy. Such violent weather was unknown on Zealer, the ambassador's homeworld, where gentle rains and mild temperatures prevailed year-round. Class 12 Death World, Talker whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's instruments. How could anything intelligent evolve in such conditions? It was a question that had plagued the Zalari High Council since humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage for millennia. The Zalari had avoided death worlds, planets where extreme environmental conditions bred resilient, highly adaptive, and often aggressive lifeforms. 300 cycles ago, the Zalari had attempted contact with the Morix, another death world species. The result had been catastrophic. The Morix, seeing the Zalari as weak and unprepared for war, launched a full-scale invasion. That resulted in the loss of 2 Zalari colony worlds and millions of lives before the Galactic Confederation intervened. Since then, the Zalari had limited their interactions to peaceful species, those from gentle worlds like their own. But humanity was different. They had achieved faster-than-light travel, they had built vast orbital stations, expanded into their solar system, and now, contact with them was inevitable. The High Council had debated for months, arguing over whether to risk diplomatic engagement or adopt a policy of silent observation. In the end, they had chosen caution, better to control the first meeting than to let it happen under uncontrolled circumstances, and so, Talker had volunteered. Ambassador, said his aide, Hanarel, her voice hesitant. The human representatives have transmitted landing coordinates. The diplomatic shuttle is ready for descent. Talker exhaled slowly, his mind racing through the data he had memorized. Humans were robust creatures, denser bones, stronger muscles, efficient respiratory systems. Their high-gravity world, abundant predators, and chaotic climates had shaped them into potential threats. Yet, despite their terrifying physical attributes, intelligence reports suggested they possessed art, music, philosophy. Could such a species have truly overcome their evolutionary programming? Perhaps they have, Talker muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The diplomatic shuttle detached from the main vessel, its stabilizers engaging as it began its descent through the atmosphere. At first, everything seemed stable, but as they passed through the upper cloud layers, turbulence struck like an unseen predator. The shuttle lurched sideways, throwing Talker against his restraints. Warning lights flashed across the control panels as the pilot gritted her teeth, gripping the controls tightly. Atmospheric disturbance, she reported, her voice strained. Stronger than anticipated. Primary stabilizers failing. Talker tightened his grip on the armrest as the shuttle shook violently. His species was not accustomed to such unpredictability on Zealer. Conditions were stable, environments predictable on Earth. Even the weather was a force to be reckoned with. Can we abort and return to the main vessel? He asked. The pilot shook her head sharply. Negative, Ambassador, we're committed to the descent now. The comm system crackled to life, a voice speaking in the standardized Confederation language. Zalari vessel, we detect you're experiencing stabilizer failure. Maintain your current trajectory. Emergency teams are being dispatched to your landing zone. More alarms blared as the shuttle broke through the thick storm clouds below. Human structures came into view, a landing facility surrounded by buildings of varying sizes, stretching out in rigid, grid-like formations. The ground was rushing up to meet them far too quickly. "Brace for impact," the pilot shouted, her voice tight with concentration. Talker barely had time to process what was happening before the shuttle slammed into the landing pad with a deafening screech of metal against concrete. Sparks erupted as the vessel skidded across the platform, its hull grinding against the reinforced structure. Something in the engine compartment exploded, sending acrid smoke billowing into the cabin. Emergency systems activated instantly, releasing fire-suppressant foam. But the smell of burning electronics still stung Talker's nasal passages. Through the cracked viewport, he saw figures moving through the smoke. Humans. They were running toward the shuttle, their movements quick, decisive, terrifyingly efficient. "They're coming," Hennerel whispered beside him, fear creeping into her voice. "The Deathworlders are coming." The shuttle's hatch had been damaged in the crash, refusing to open through the viewport. Talker watched as a human approached the door, attaching a strange device to the outer frame. A sharp hissing sound followed, and then, with remarkable precision, the entire hatch was pulled free. Smoke poured out as humans entered, clad in protective gear, carrying equipment Talker did not recognize. One human, seemingly the leader, removed his face covering, revealing pinkish skin and small, rounded eyes. "Ambassador," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Can you understand me? Are you injured?" Talker forced himself to speak, fighting against his body's instinct to freeze in the face of danger. We are mostly unharmed. The crash." "Don't worry about that now," the human said. "We need to get you out before the fuel cells rupture." Even as he spoke, other humans moved with practiced efficiency. One was already assisting the pilot, who had suffered a head injury. Another pair helped Hennerel and the communications officer, their motions careful yet strong. There was no hesitation, no hostility, only purpose. Outside, rain poured down as the humans led the Zalari to a sheltered area. Medical personnel immediately began examining the injured, administering aid with a competence that both impressed and unnerved Talker. He noticed one human had suffered burns on his hands while extracting them from the wreckage, yet he continued working without complaint. A woman approached, her expression calm but concerned. "Ambassador Talker," she said. "I'm Director Park of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. I apologize for the dangerous landing conditions." Talker stared at her, struggling to reconcile his expectations with what he was witnessing. "Your people, they risked themselves for us." Director Park tilted her head. "Of course we did. Did you expect us to let you die? But you are from a death world. Your species, our information suggested." Understanding dawned in the woman's eyes. She smiled slightly. "You assumed our classification defined our behavior." She gestured toward the burning wreckage as human emergency crews worked to contain the fire. "Ambassador, we may have evolved in harsh conditions, but that's precisely why we value life so highly. We know how fragile it can be." As if to punctuate her words, a massive explosion rocked the landing pad, the remains of the shuttle's fuel cells igniting in a fiery blast. Yet, even in the face of danger, the humans pressed on, unwavering. For the first time, Talker wondered if the Zalari had misunderstood the true nature of Deathworlders. The echoes of the explosion had barely faded when Ambassador TCK found himself pulled to his feet by the surprisingly firm grip of a human emergency responder. His vision swam from the force of the crash, his body struggling to process the sensory overload caused by the unfamiliar environment. Earth's gravity felt heavier than he anticipated, and the damp air carried an electric charge from the recent thunderstorm. Rain pelted his delicate skin as he stumbled forward under the guidance of the humans. The Eluvians were not built for such conditions. On their homeworld, the atmosphere was stable, the climate temperate, the environment controlled. There were no violent storms, no unexpected temperature fluctuations, and yet, here they were, caught in the throes of an alien tempest on a death world that should have, by all logic, been uninhabitable for any species that sought peace and longevity. Yet, the humans thrived here. Not only had they built vast civilizations on a planet that defied reason, but they also moved through the storm with a practiced ease that unsettled TCK. The humans acted with precision, their movements quick but never erratic, their coordination a testament to their experience with disaster. They shouted to one another, their language sharp and guttural compared to the fluid tones of Eluvian speech, and yet, there was no chaos in their actions, only determination. TCK barely registered as they were led inside a reinforced building, its walls thick, its temperature carefully controlled to provide comfort. It took him a moment to process that they were in a medical ward, surrounded by human physicians dressed in practical, form-fitting uniforms, their hands moving with swift expertise as they examined the Eluvian delegation. Hannah, TCK's assistant, clutched at her arm, her thin fingers trembling as a human medic knelt before her, inspecting what appeared to be a minor burn. She flinched at the touch but said nothing. Their kind had always been wary of physical contact, preferring space and distance to intimacy, yet the human did not hesitate. He applied a cooling salve to her injury and wrapped it with a bandage as if she were one of his own kind. TCK turned as the human named Director Park approached, her expression unreadable. Unlike the emergency responders, she wore a formal outfit that suggested authority. Despite his trepidation, he met her gaze, searching for any hint of deception or malice. Instead, he found only curiosity. "I apologize for the landing conditions, Ambassador," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Earth's weather can be unpredictable, but we're relieved that you and your team are safe." TCK swallowed hard. The words were diplomatic, polite, but they did not erase the reality of what had just happened. "Your people, they risked their lives to save us." His voice was almost a whisper, the weight of the statement settling heavily on him. Director Park tilted her head slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Of course, did you expect otherwise?" TCK hesitated. He knew what was expected of him. He was an envoy of his people, meant to approach this meeting with caution, to keep his responses measured, his emotions controlled, and yet, he found himself unable to suppress the sheer bewilderment that threatened to overwhelm him. "We were told your kind is dangerous," he admitted. "You come from a death world, you are." He hesitated, but the words came unbidden. "Predators." Director Park did not react with offense or anger. Instead, she simply exhaled, as if she had heard the sentiment many times before. "Our world is dangerous," she agreed. "And our history is full of violence, but survival on a world like this has taught us something important." She gestured toward the humans still tending to the injured Eluvians, some of whom had begun to relax in their presence. "We understand how fragile life is. We know that strength alone isn't enough to survive. Cooperation, trust, and sacrifice, these are what allow a species to endure. Without them, we wouldn't be here." TCK absorbed her words, his mind reeling. It was a concept so foreign, so at odds with the warnings the Council of Elders had given him before he embarked on this mission. The Eluvians had always believed that species from dangerous worlds would be inherently aggressive, selfish, and prone to destruction, and yet, these humans, these Deathworlders, acted with a level of compassion he had never expected. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. Several human officials had arrived, their presence drawing the focus of the gathered crowd. One of them, an older man with sharp eyes and an air of authority, stepped forward. He and Director Park exchanged brief words before turning their attention to TCK. "Ambassador, this is General Langley," Park introduced. "He oversees planetary security and will be involved in further discussions regarding the safety of your delegation." TCK stiffened, a military figure that was more in line with what he had anticipated from humans. He had read the reports. Humans had built vast military forces, engaged in countless wars, and held power through technological and tactical superiority, and yet, as he studied the general's expression, he saw no malice, only calculation. "We have much to discuss, Ambassador," Langley said, his tone direct but not hostile. "For now, rest. You and your people have been through enough today. We will speak again soon." TCK found himself nodding. Though his mind was still clouded with questions, he was beginning to realize that everything he thought he knew about humanity was flawed, and if that was true, then what else had the Confederation gotten wrong? As he was led to his quarters, his gaze drifted once more to the storm raging outside. The planet was fierce, relentless, and untamed, and yet, in its chaos, the humans had found a way to thrive, not through domination, but through unity. It was a truth that unsettled him, and one that he could not afford to ignore. For the first time, he wondered if the Eluvians had misjudged not only humanity, but themselves. Captain Ju stood at the command center of the Eluvian space station, Harmony Point, watching the Eluvian crew members move cautiously around their human counterparts 6 weeks into their joint deployment. The tension in the air had barely diminished. The Eluvian personnel still treated the humans as unpredictable creatures. Dangerous, unpredictable, and impossibly resilient. Sergeant Doan leaned in slightly. Still feels like we're walking through a zoo exhibit. Just sighed. They'll get used to us, they have to. If we don't build trust before the Kel fleet arrives, this alliance is doomed. The looming threat of the Kel fleet was the unspoken weight pressing down on every diplomatic effort between the humans and the Eluvians. The Kels were relentless conquerors, known for their brutal efficiency in war. With their fleet closing in on Eluvian space, cooperation between the two species was no longer optional. It was a necessity for survival. As they prepared for another joint training drill, Commander Sora, the station's Eluvian leader, called the teams to attention. We will begin a station-wide emergency response simulation in preparation for potential hostile action. Mixed teams will be assigned across key sectors. Humans will follow standard Eluvian protocols. Ju frowned. With all due respect, we should be incorporating human emergency procedures as well. Different methods might complement each other. The room grew silent as the Eluvian officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lieutenant Jinsu finally spoke up. Human protocols are designed for Earth conditions and human physiology. They may not be suitable for Eluvian technology. Ju crossed her arms. We improvise when we have to, and emergencies require improvisation. After a moment's hesitation, Commander Sora nodded. Very well, we will incorporate human emergency techniques alongside our own. As the simulation began, warning lights flashed through the corridors of Harmony Point, signaling a cascading failure in the life support systems. The mixed teams sprang into action. Following their assigned protocols, Ju's team was stationed near Section 12, closely monitoring Eluvian engineers as they performed their tasks with meticulous precision. Then, without warning, the alarms changed. The artificial emergency had triggered something real. A red warning sign flashed across the command center displays. Actual life support failure detected in Section 10. Atmospheric contamination spreading. Ju turned to Jinsu. Tell me that's still part of the simulation. Jinsu's face went pale. It's not. Something's actually wrong. The moment stretched unbearably. The Eluvians froze, their wide eyes locked onto the blinking alarms. It was their natural response to danger. A pause, a hesitation as their minds processed the threat. A pause that, in a real crisis, could mean disaster. Sergeant Doan, get emergency breathers for the Eluvians. Ju barked, shoving past the stunned engineers to access the environmental control panel. Jinsu, I need access to life support systems. Jinsu blinked, fighting against his instinctive freeze response. The access codes? Ju didn't wait. She had studied the station's protocols well enough to bypass the delay. Computer, emergency override alpha-level authorization. Human Alliance protocols grant temporary access to all systems. The station's AI hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. Access granted. Ju's fingers flew across the controls. The station trembled as emergency bulkheads began sealing off contaminated sections. A coolant leak had mixed with the atmospheric processors, creating a toxic gas that was now spreading through multiple corridors. Meanwhile, the power grid was fluctuating dangerously, threatening total system failure. We need to isolate Section 10 completely and reroute life support through the auxiliary systems, Ju said, her voice sharp with urgency. That's not possible, Jinsu protested. The auxiliary systems aren't designed to handle that load. Then we make them handle it, Ju shot back. Show me the access panels. Sergeant Doan was already distributing emergency masks to the Eluvians, who were still struggling to process the unfolding chaos. The humans moved with purpose, their training kicking in without hesitation. When a toxic gas leak threatened to breach their position, Doan simply wrapped his uniform jacket around his face and kept working. The Eluvians watched in stunned silence as the humans adapted effortlessly to the crisis. When standard tools couldn't reach a critical valve, a human engineer improvised, fashioning a makeshift tool from spare parts. When the computer systems failed, they switched to manual overrides without missing a beat. 2 hours later, the emergency was contained. Section 10 remained sealed off, but the rest of the station was stable. The mixed teams gathered in the command center, exhausted but victorious. Commander Sora looked at the human officers with something bordering on disbelief. I don't understand. How did you continue functioning during such chaos? There was no clear protocol for this specific emergency. Ju smiled slightly. On Earth, chaos is part of daily life. We grow up expecting the unexpected. We train to improvise because we have to. Lieutenant Jinsu stepped forward, his earlier skepticism forgotten. You saved the station. I watched you work, Captain. Your people never hesitated, never froze. Ju nodded. And your people provided crucial knowledge of the station's systems once you recovered from the shock. That's why we need to keep training together. We have different strengths. If we work as one, we stand a chance against the Kel. A heavy silence settled over the room. The truth was undeniable. Humanity and the Eluvians had little time left before war reached them. The only question was whether they would be ready when it did. The aftermath of the near-catastrophic emergency on Harmony Point had shaken both the Eluvian and human crew members. The unexpected failure of the station's life support system had demonstrated one undeniable truth. Survival in the unforgiving vacuum of space required adaptability, courage, and cooperation, and if there was one thing the humans had proven beyond any doubt, it was that they possessed these qualities in abundance. Captain Ju stood in the dimly lit command center, reviewing the station's systems alongside Commander Sora and Lieutenant Jinsu. The once tense relationship between the humans and the Eluvians was shifting, but it was not yet solidified. Trust was forming, but it was fragile. Like glass on the edge of a high ledge, any misstep could send it shattering. Final diagnostics report, Ju said, scanning the data before her. It confirms what we suspected. This wasn't just an accident. The coolant system failure originated from a deliberate tampering of the station's main environmental regulators. Someone wanted this to happen. Commander Sora stiffened. You are suggesting sabotage? By whom? The station has no known enemies. Ju folded her arms. That's what we need to find out. The attack targeted a crucial life support segment, and could have wiped out half of the station. Whoever did this wanted us dead, or at the very least, wanted to see how we would react. Jinsu looked uneasy. Captain, I don't mean to question your concerns, but who would benefit from such an attack? There are no factions aboard the station. We are a peaceful research and diplomatic hub. This doesn't make sense. Sergeant Doan, who had been standing near the station's security panel, leaned in. We need to look at the bigger picture. If the station is compromised, it weakens the growing alliance between humans and Eluvians. There are plenty of groups in the galaxy who wouldn't want that to happen. The words hung in the air. Ju knew Doan was right. Humanity's entry into the interstellar stage had already caused political ripples. The Confederation had classified them as a Deathworld species, dangerous and unpredictable. If humans proved to be reliable, adaptable, and cooperative, that classification might change, and that change would mean a shift in power. Commander Sora exhaled deeply. If there is indeed an enemy at work, we need to act carefully. We must not let fear guide us, but rather logic. We will start an internal investigation immediately. Lieutenant Jinsu, I want a full security sweep of the station. Work with the humans to review all logs and system records. Jinsu hesitated for only a second before nodding. Understood, Commander. Ju turned to Doan. Get our people together. I want all human personnel briefed. We may have stopped the crisis today, but I don't want to be caught off guard again. As the meeting concluded, Ju felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had just begun to build a fragile bridge of trust, and now unseen forces threatened to tear it apart before it could be completed. The investigation begins. The next few days were filled with intense scrutiny. Security teams, both human and Eluvian, scoured the station's systems for any signs of infiltration. They analyzed records, reviewed access logs, and interviewed every crew member who had been near the compromised systems in the last 2 cycles. Despite their efforts, no single piece of evidence pointed to a culprit. The sabotage had been executed with precision, leaving no trace of its origin. Whoever had done this knew exactly how to avoid detection. But Ju refused to accept that there were no answers. Something had to be there. They just hadn't looked in the right place yet. Late one evening, as Ju was going over reports in her quarters, a chime alerted her to an incoming message. It was from Jinsu. Captain, I think I found something. It's not much, but it's unusual enough to warrant your attention. Meet me in the maintenance corridor near Section 10. Ju grabbed her datapad and hurried to the meeting point. When she arrived, Jinsu was standing near a small access panel, his expression tense. What is it? Ju asked. Jinsu gestured to the panel. This access point should have been locked during the crisis, but when I ran a system-wide check, I found records of an unauthorized user opening it just minutes before the coolant failure started. Someone was here. Ju narrowed her eyes. Can you trace who accessed it? Jinsu sighed. That's the problem. Whoever did it used an anonymized ID. The logs show a sequence that doesn't match any authorized user, but the method used to bypass security looks familiar. Ju frowned. Familiar how? Jinsu hesitated before answering. It looks like the kind of tactics used by certain factions within the Confederation, groups that see humans as a threat to the status quo. Ju's mind raced. This was worse than she thought. If a faction from the Confederation was behind this, it meant they weren't just dealing with internal sabotage. They were part of a much larger game. A dangerous discovery. Before they could analyze the data further, a sudden alert blared through the station's communications system. Warning! Unauthorized vessel detected on approach. Vector security teams to stand by. Ju and Jinsu exchanged looks before sprinting toward the command center. When they arrived, the station's defense operators had already pulled up visuals of the approaching ship. It was sleek, black, an unmarked A design that screamed covert operations. They're not broadcasting any identification codes, the lead security officer reported. And they're moving fast. Commander Sora's face was grim. What do they want? Ju had a sinking feeling. If they're connected to the sabotage, they're here to clean up any loose ends. We need to be ready. As the station went into high alert, the unmarked vessel slowed. Hovering just outside docking range, it was waiting, observing, and then, without warning, it opened communication. A voice crackled through the speakers. Harmony Point, this is Captain Aros of the Silent Veil. You have something that belongs to us. Surrender it now, and we will leave peacefully. Commander Sora's eyes narrowed. What are they talking about? Ju exchanged glances with Jinsu. The only thing they had recently uncovered was the security breach. Ju stepped forward. You'll have to be more specific. What exactly do you think we have? A pause, then the voice replied, cold and precise. You found our operatives' work. We can't allow that information to leave this station. You have 1 hour to comply, or we will be forced to take action. Tension filled the room. The station had defenses, but it was not built for military engagements. Aro's ship, on the other hand, was clearly designed for infiltration and combat. If it came to a fight, Harmony Point would be at a severe disadvantage. Ju clenched her fists. They're trying to erase the evidence. If we give in, we lose our only chance to expose what's really going on. Commander Sora nodded. Then we must find another way. If the Confederation truly wishes to divide us, we must show them that we stand together. The countdown had begun, and as Ju stared at the ominous vessel outside, she knew that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of the station, but the fragile alliance between humanity and the Eluvians. The station was still reeling from the emergency in Section 10, but a newfound respect had grown between the humans and the Eluvians now. Both species stood at a crossroads, ready to take their cooperation to the next level. However, as they worked to stabilize the station's systems and ensure the safety of its inhabitants, new challenges arose that would test their growing alliance even further. Captain Ju and her team were in the command center, reviewing the station's logs. They had managed to contain the toxic leak and reroute power, but there were lingering inconsistencies in the station's energy readings. Something was off. Lieutenant Jinsu, what do you make of this? Ju asked, pointing at the display. The Eluvian officer hesitated before stepping closer. Despite his earlier skepticism about the humans, he had come to respect their ability to act decisively under pressure. Jinsu examined the data carefully. It looks like power fluctuations are still occurring in the outer sections of the station. That shouldn't be happening. The systems are fully stabilized now. Sergeant Doan frowned. Unless there's something we miss. Commander Sora stepped forward. We should conduct a station-wide diagnostic. There could be a deeper issue within the infrastructure that we haven't accounted for. Agreed. Ju nodded. Let's split up into teams. If there's another malfunction waiting to happen, we need to find it before it turns into another disaster. As the humans and Eluvians formed mixed teams and moved through the station's various sections, an uneasy feeling settled over them. The emergency had exposed weaknesses not only in the station's structure but also in their perceptions of one another. Though the Eluvians had relied on rigid protocols, the humans had shown adaptability. It was clear now that both species had something to learn from each other. Ju led her team through the engineering sector, where Eluvian technicians worked alongside human engineers to examine the power relays. Though their initial interactions had been tense, the Eluvians were beginning to trust the humans' unconventional methods. "This conduit should be stable," an Eluvian engineer murmured, adjusting a control panel. "But it keeps drawing more power than it should." Doan knelt down beside the conduit, his trained eyes scanning the panel. "Could be a hidden fault. These readings don't match up. I'll check the manual relays." J nodded. "Stay on comms if something looks off, report it immediately." As they worked, Doan moved to a maintenance hatch, pried it open, and slid inside the crawlspace. His flashlight beam cut through the dim interior, illuminating the conduits that ran along the narrow corridor. He adjusted his scanner, checking for anomalies. Then he saw it. "Captain," he called through his earpiece. "We've got something strange here. The power lines are intact, but there's an additional system drawing energy, something that isn't on the station's blueprint." Joe exchanged a glance with Jinsu. "Could it be a malfunctioning backup system?" Doan hesitated. "No, it looks deliberate. Somebody installed this separately and recently." Silence fell over the comms for a moment, then Joe responded. "Mark the location and get back here. We need to report this immediately." Back in the command center, the station's leadership gathered to assess the situation. The humans and Eluvians had worked together to avert disaster before, but now they faced a new problem, one that suggested something more than just technical malfunctions. "Are you suggesting that someone deliberately installed unauthorized systems on this station?" Commander Sora asked, his expression troubled. J nodded. "It's possible. We don't have enough evidence yet, but if these hidden systems are drawing power, it means someone installed them with a purpose, and that purpose may not be good." Jinsu's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. "We must investigate further if there's any kind of sabotage." "Then we're in danger," J finished. "We need to find out who's behind this before it's too late." Over the next several hours, teams scoured the station, uncovering more hidden modifications. Some were buried deep within the station's maintenance tunnels. Others were integrated into existing systems so seamlessly that they would have gone unnoticed if not for the humans' thorough inspection. Zhu and Jinsu examined one such installation, their gazes locked on the flickering control panel before them. "These modifications could compromise critical systems," Jinsu admitted. "If they were activated at the wrong moment, it could bring the entire station down," Zhu concluded grimly. At that moment, an alarm blared throughout the station. The lights flickered, and emergency indicators flashed red. Commander Sora's voice came through the station-wide intercom. "All personnel, report to emergency stations immediately. We have detected an unauthorized signal attempting to access the station's command system. Security teams, lock down critical sections. This is not a drill." Zhu and Jinsu exchanged looks of alarm before sprinting back toward the command center. Something, or someone, was trying to take control of Harmony Point. As security teams moved to secure key locations, Zhu and her team raced against time to uncover the source of the attack. Their suspicions had been correct. Someone had been tampering with the station's systems all along, but now, it was no longer just a hidden anomaly, it was an active threat. Who could be behind this? Jinsu muttered as he worked feverishly to block the unauthorized access attempts. "And why?" Zhu's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." With tensions high and the fate of Harmony Point hanging in the balance, the humans and Eluvians would have to prove that their fragile alliance could withstand more than just the crisis. They would have to prove they could survive the unseen enemy now lurking within their ranks. The days following the station's near-catastrophic failure were tense but transformative. The Eluvians, still recovering from the shock of the emergency, found themselves reassessing their long-held beliefs about humans. Captain Zhu and her team had not only saved the station but had demonstrated a level of adaptability and resilience that defied every preconception the Eluvians had held about Deathworlders, where the Eluvian species had evolved in relative tranquility, shaping their instincts toward caution and deliberation. Humans had been molded by an environment that demanded swift action, innovation, and above all, cooperation. It was a lesson the Eluvians had not expected to learn, at least not in such a dramatic fashion. Commander Sora, the station's Eluvian leader, had been particularly affected. He had always considered humans unpredictable and potentially dangerous, their reputation among the Galactic Confederation shaped by old fears of Deathworld aggression. Yet, standing before his crew, he saw how their perspective had shifted. The humans were no longer viewed with the same unease. There was now a cautious respect. A recognition that their survival skills were not rooted in violence but in necessity. It was a difficult realization for many of the Eluvians, but one that could no longer be ignored. Despite this newfound respect, tensions still simmered beneath the surface. Many of the Eluvian officers struggled with their own instinctual fear responses, and some resisted acknowledging the humans' contributions. Lieutenant Jinsu, the officer who had initially resisted Zhu's insistence on adapting emergency protocols, found himself at a crossroads. His natural caution and adherence to protocol had been shaken, and he now sought to understand the humans' mindset better. Watching them work in the aftermath of the crisis, he began to realize that their approach to survival was not recklessness. It was a different kind of calculation, one based on experience rather than avoidance. As the station recovered, the joint training drills between humans and Eluvians continued, but with an altered dynamic. The Eluvians were no longer merely tolerating human involvement. They were actively observing, learning, and in some cases, even emulating human problem-solving strategies. Zhu and her team took this as an opportunity to bridge the cultural gap further. They introduced a series of simulations that required mixed teams to work together, combining Eluvian strategic thinking with human improvisation. It was not an easy process. The Eluvians still hesitated in high-pressure situations, their evolutionary instincts conflicting with the rapid decision-making required in emergencies. One such simulation involved a scenario where a simulated power failure threatened to disable the station's artificial gravity. The Eluvians, following standard protocol, moved to shut down all auxiliary systems and isolate the affected area. A safe but slow approach. The humans, however, immediately sought alternative methods to stabilize the power grid, using redundant systems in a way the Eluvians had never considered. As the simulation progressed, both sides began to understand the strengths of each other's approaches. The Eluvians provided meticulous, step-by-step strategies to minimize risk, while the humans offered innovative solutions to keep the situation from escalating. Slowly but surely, a true partnership was forming. Despite these advancements, there remained those who doubted the wisdom of working so closely with humans within the higher echelons of the Eluvian government. Concerns were being raised about the long-term consequences of this alliance. A faction within the Council of Elders, still haunted by the memory of the Morix disaster centuries ago, argued that Deathworlders, regardless of their demonstrated cooperation, were inherently too unpredictable. Reports of human-led military campaigns on distant worlds, their rapid technological advancements, and their willingness to push the boundaries of exploration all fed into the fear that humans could one day pose a threat to the Confederation itself. Unbeknownst to Zhu and her team, a classified directive had been issued by certain high-ranking Eluvian officials. The Eluvian station leaders were to closely monitor human activities and report any signs of potential aggression or deviation from Confederation norms. Commander Sora, while hesitant about the order, complied out of duty. He had seen firsthand the capabilities of the humans, and understood that they were not the mindless aggressors some had feared, but the directive left him uneasy. The Eluvians valued caution above all else, yet he began to question whether their caution was truly serving them, or holding them back. Meanwhile, tensions on the station escalated further when a new crisis arose. A supply vessel, carrying essential resources for both human and Eluvian personnel, suffered a catastrophic engine failure while approaching the station. The vessel, a Confederation ship with mixed-species crew members, was now drifting, unable to correct its trajectory. If it continued on its current path, it would collide with the station's outer docking ring within hours, causing significant structural damage and potentially compromising station integrity. The response from the station's command was immediate. Zhu, along with Commander Sora and their respective teams, convened in the control center to devise a solution. The standard Eluvian protocol called for a controlled evacuation of all personnel from the outer docking ring and for emergency drones to attempt a remote stabilization of the drifting vessel. The problem was that the vessel's engines were too badly damaged to respond to standard drone commands, and time was running out. "We don't have time for remote stabilization," Zhu argued. "We need to send a team out there and manually secure the ship before it reaches the docking ring." Sora hesitated. The idea of sending personnel into open space for a high-risk maneuver went against every principle of Eluvian safety protocol. "It's too dangerous," he said. "We can't risk any lives when there are alternatives." Ju's expression hardened. "Commander, with all due respect, the alternative is watching that ship tear through your station. I'll take a team out there myself." Sora was torn between his instincts and the reality of the situation. He looked at his officers, who were waiting for his command. Then, to Ju's surprise, Lieutenant Jinsu stepped forward. "She's right," he said. "We have to act now." The decision was made. A joint team of humans and Eluvians, outfitted in EVA suits, was assembled for the operation. As they exited the station's airlock, the full scale of the task ahead became clear. The supply vessel, caught in a slow but deadly spiral, loomed ahead of them, its damaged thrusters flickering intermittently. Ju took the lead, guiding the team with the confidence of someone who had done this before. The Eluvians followed, their movements more hesitant in the microgravity environment. Reaching the vessel, the team split into groups, humans working to stabilize the ship's trajectory while Eluvians focused on reactivating emergency power. Ju's team secured tether lines to prevent further drift, while Jinsu, still adjusting to the rapid decision-making required in high-stakes situations, followed Ju's lead. They had to reroute power manually, a task that required careful coordination between human engineering techniques and Eluvian interface systems. As they worked, a sudden warning flashed across Ju's helmet display. An unexpected pressure built up in one of the vessel's fuel lines. Before she could react, an explosion tore through the side of the ship, sending debris flying. The shockwave knocked Ju backward, her tether snapping as she tumbled away into open space. For a moment, silence. Then Jinsu's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain Ju! Can you hear me?" Ju fought to regain control, her breathing heavy as she activated her suit's thrusters. The station was a distant speck. The vastness of space surrounding her training kicked in. She oriented herself, locating her trajectory, calculating her approach vector, but she was drifting too fast. Back at the ship, Jinsu and the team worked frantically. He had seen how humans operated in emergencies. Now, it was his turn to act. Ignoring his racing heart, he initiated a manual override on the ship's emergency thrusters, adjusting their output to create a controlled burst. The force of the thrusters created a minor gravitational pull, just enough to alter Ju's course. Ju gritted her teeth as she felt the pull of gravity shift. With a final burst from her thrusters, she realigned herself and reached out. Jinsu caught her arm, securing her tether as he pulled her back toward the vessel. "Not bad, Lieutenant," Ju said, breathing heavily. Jinsu exhaled, his hands still shaking. "I just did what needed to be done." With the immediate danger averted, the team completed the stabilization process, securing the ship just moments before it would have collided with the station. As they returned to the airlock, Ju looked at Jinsu, seeing something different in him. He had faced fear, pushed past it, and acted. Later, in the control center, Commander Sora addressed the assembled team. "You risked your lives today to save this station," he said. "And in doing so, you've proven something we had not fully understood. Strength is not just in caution, but in the courage to act." Ju smiled. The gap between their species was closing one crisis at a time. They were learning to trust each other, and perhaps, in the process, they were building something far greater than an alliance. They were forging a future where Deathworlders and Gentleworld species could truly stand side by side. The aftermath of the crisis on Harmony Point had left a lasting impression on both the humans and the Eluvians. Where once there had been hesitation and distrust, there was now a growing sense of camaraderie. Captain Ju stood at the observation deck, watching as human and Eluvian personnel worked together in the docking bay below. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. "You look deep in thought," Commander Sora said as he approached, his blue-tinted skin shimmering under the station's artificial lighting. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," Ju replied, offering him a small smile. "When we first arrived, your people feared us. Now, I see them working alongside my crew like they've been doing it for years." "Change takes time," Sora admitted. "But you've proven something valuable to us. You and your people don't just survive chaos. You thrive in it, and more importantly, you've shown us that strength isn't just about physical endurance, it's about adaptability and the will to protect others." Ju appreciated his words, But there was still one looming challenge ahead: the imminent arrival of the Kel fleet. The hostile alien force had been encroaching on Eluvian territory, and their next target would likely be Harmony Point. The station's defenses were minimal, and the Eluvians were ill-equipped to handle a full-scale invasion. "The Kel will be here soon," Ju said grimly. "Are your people ready?" Sora hesitated, but then nodded. "We've learned much from you and your team, but I fear knowledge alone won't be enough. That's why we fight together," Ju said firmly. "We don't abandon our allies." The next day, final preparations were underway. The humans had worked tirelessly to modify the station's defenses, improvising new strategies to make up for the lack of heavy weaponry. Ju's engineers had taught the Eluvians how to reinforce key areas and reroute power to critical systems. Sora's team had, in turn, provided detailed knowledge of Kel battle tactics. When the warning sirens finally blared, no one panicked. The Eluvians and humans alike took their positions, ready to face the threat together. Ju stood on the command deck, her jaw tight as the Kel fleet emerged from hyperspace. "Here they come," Sergeant Doan muttered. The Kel ships were jagged, black structures that absorbed light rather than reflected it. They moved in precise formations, their intent clear. A transmission came through, filled with guttural snarls and a single translated message: "Surrender or be destroyed." Ju exchanged a glance with Sora. "Not today." The battle began. The station's newly reinforced shields held longer than expected, allowing the defenders to return fire. The Kel were not used to resistance from an Eluvian station, and the human tactics caught them off guard. Ju led a strike team to one of the docking bays, where Kel boarding parties had breached the outer hold. The fight was brutal, but the humans' training and Eluvians' knowledge of the station gave them the upper hand. Sora himself joined the fray, proving that while his people had once been hesitant to fight, they were no longer willing to be victims. For hours, the battle raged. Fires broke out in multiple sections, and life support systems flickered, but the defenders held their ground. Then, when it seemed like the Kel would overwhelm them, reinforcements arrived. A human fleet, answering Harmony Point's distress call, dropped out of hyperspace. The tide of battle turned in an instant. The Kel, unwilling to risk a full confrontation with the reinforced human-Eluvian alliance, retreated into the void. The station was damaged but still standing. The price had been high, with casualties on both sides, but they had won. In the aftermath, as repairs began, Ju and Sora stood together once more, looking out at the wreckage of the battle. "You saved us," Sora said. "Your people saved us." "No," Ju corrected. "We saved each other." The old fears were gone now, replaced by something far more powerful: trust. And in that trust, a new alliance was born, one that would reshape the future of the galaxy.